It doesn't matter what photographic evidence one can provide to prove that Apollo was in Earth orbit. Nor does it matter how many telecasts were proven to have been pre-filmed and then edited before broadcast. Or how many videos were released earlier than NASA claimed they were filmed. Or in the case of the 16mm footage aired before their return to Earth. Or in the case of the 16mm footage aired before their return to Earth.
We've seen the separation of the command module from the lunar module, like the separation of some primitive cell. We're going to have to learn and pass on to succeeding generations. A little bit of the downrange landing was due to Armstrong's human decision to override what the computer was telling him, and the computer was telling him to land in the middle of what he called a crater the size of a football pitch. Again, there's a little confusion about whether it's a crater or a rock field that he said.
None of this matters to the propagandists, because they all rely on the same counter-argument. Just like the Earth and the Moon, spacecrafts have their own reflective properties. But what more, given their close proximity to the Earth, low-orbit spacecraft are so bright that they can be seen from the ground without the aid of optics. Low-orbit spacecraft are so bright that they can be seen from the ground without the aid of optics. Such as this recent example available on YouTube. Space Shuttle Discovery and the International Space Station are both beautifully lit and seen from the surface of the Earth. Without the aid of optics. 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 Truth be told, I have seen orbiting shuttles too, and my uncle remembers watching Sputnik as it orbited the Earth. If one could see Russia's little beach ball, then an Earth-orbiting Apollo craft would also have been extremely visible at night. It is here where propagandists try to shoot down the evidence that the crews are in Earth orbit for the duration of their missions. They all beg the same question. If they really were in low Earth orbit, why did no one see an Apollo spacecraft from the ground during the time it was supposed to be in lunar space? Well, guess what? You ready for this? Something was spotted. At around 7 PM in the metropolitan and country areas in the south of Australia, just some 5 hours before the Apollo 11 capsule re-entered the atmosphere, residents and astronomers in those areas spotted a bright light streaking across the night sky. It took everyone so completely by shock that in the midst of the surprise, the Carnarvon tracking station's uncertain explanation for the sighting was an unidentified satellite re-entering the atmosphere. It can be no coincidence that this bright object remained in the sky for about 4 minutes, which, as Jim Olberg reminds us, is exactly the same amount of time an orbiting spacecraft would have been visible from the ground. As quoted at clavis.org, "If the astronauts were indeed in low Earth orbit, they would have been in the necessary line of sight for the ground stations for only 4 to 5 minutes at a time." I guess the same goes for anyone who dared to look up to the sky. Winderley, by his own admission, confirms this.
Mr. Sibrel has no actual evidence that the Apollo spacecraft stayed in low Earth orbit the whole time. nor can he explain how it was able to go for 2 weeks without being spotted in the night sky. It would have been the brightest object in the sky, next to the Moon and Venus, and it would have been moving so fast that it would have transisted the night sky in about 3 minutes. Bright, fast-moving objects in the sky attract attention.
Yes, they certainly do. The propagandist's #1 argument against the low Earth orbit evidence has unwittingly compelled them to confirm that evidence. No question, Apollo 11 was in Earth orbit when it was supposed to be 35,000 miles away from the Earth on its voyage home. And it attracted the attention of hundreds of Australians. Ex-Royal Australian Air Force pilot Harry Smith saw it at 7:05 p.m. whilst he was driving. It was the most remarkable thing he had ever seen in the sky. The Dunbury police received 15 separate phone calls from as far afield as Donnybrook to Harvey. All 15 of them reported the same sightings. One of the callers, a car salesman by the name of Michael Dublas, saw it on his way home. In his own words, "It gave me a big fright, and as soon as I got to the Old Coast Road, I stopped at the first house I saw and nearly banged down the door. A man with a little child in his arms opened the door, and I asked him, 'Do you believe in flying saucers?' He said no. And I said to him, 'Well, look at that.' He looked to where I was pointing, and all he could say was, 'My God.'" Quite contrary to what the propagandists will say, such sightings were observed and documented in the Australian newspapers at the time. But with the excitement of man returning from his first visit to another planet, and with all the advertising agencies cashing in on such a big event, these sightings of an unidentified object shooting across the sky were quickly forgotten. Until, at last, this story was brushed off in late August of that year, when the Perth Observatory suggested that what they saw in the sky was the re-entry of the Russian satellite Proton 4. To explore this, I searched Encyclopedia Astronautica, Wikipedia, the Russian space web, everywhere for information about this satellite, namely when it re-entered the atmosphere. But none of the sites I found gave me any details. The internet is simply devoid of information about this satellite. All I could establish was that the Russians launched this satellite on November 16th, 1968, and it operated in orbit for 100 days. Interestingly, the time elapse from the launch of Proton 4 to the night this mystery light was spotted is approximately 250 days. So let me get this straight. Astronomers around the globe can track all Earth-orbiting spacecraft and know when and where those different craft are going to be at all times. Yet, the re-entering of a well-tracked unmanned satellite takes them completely by surprise, and it is only a month later that the observatories figure out what it was.